Okay, I'm going to talk you through the Outline and Evaluate locus of control as an explanation for resistance to social influence. So it's an 8-marker. Now, 8 markers are essentially half of a 16 marker. So in a 16 marker without a stem, the marks are usually 6 AO1 and 10 AO3. So half that for an 8 marker would be 3 for AO1 and would be 5 for AO3. So 3 for outlining it, 5 for evaluating it. So what that means is that you don't have to go into that much detail when you're describing it. And for evaluation, you probably only need 2 points, a strength and a weakness. So nice and easy to answer as long as you do that. What I did notice on the assessment was that you put a lot of evaluation in, and that evaluation was fantastic if it was a 16 marker, but because it's only an 8 marker, you didn't actually need to write that much. So, I mean, it was good. And actually it did save you in certain instances because some of your evaluation points were stronger than others, which meant that because you'd put so many, it meant that it, you know, bumped the mark up. Whereas if you'd have just put the weak ones in, you might not have got in that top band. So you kind of did save yourself by putting extra ones on, which is a strategy. But if you are struggling for timing on other questions, then that might be something to review and have a look at. So for this question, pretty much everybody explained what locus of control was and explained what an internal locus of control was and what an external locus of control was, which was great. But what kind of tripped a lot of people up was this resistance to social influence. There wasn't kind of a clear answer about which locus of control, so internal or external, means that you can resist social influence. And when we talk about social influence, we mean like obedience, we mean conformity, so any of that stuff. So the psychologist that came up with the locus of control explanation for resistance to social influence was Rotter. There was a lot of people putting Rotter, which is somebody else. So it needs to be Rotter. I don't think I was that harsh when I was marking, actually. I think I maybe give you credit for it, which I probably shouldn't have done. But it is technically Rotter, so that has to be on there. So you've got to kind of define the general concept. So let's put locus of control is dispositional. Dispositional is like the opposite of situational, so it's not things in your environment that are causing you to resist social influence. It's things inside you, like your personality, that is affecting whether or not you resist social influence. So locus of control is a dispositional explanation. Put by Rotter, which those with an internal locus of control are more likely to resist social influence than that. I'm going to put people. People with an internal locus are more likely to resist social influence than those with an external. Notice there I've gone straight in to talk about the resistance to social influence. I'm not just generally saying what internal is and what external is. There's a lot of people as well saying high internal locus of control and high external locus of control. You don't need those words. It doesn't matter. You're internal or you're external. It's enough to kind of talk about in this answer. You don't need to be making reference to high and low. It's just not necessary. It's like when people do like high validity, it don't matter. It's valid or it's not. So don't be using words like high and things like that. It's just not necessary, really. So let's see where I'm going with this question. Locus of control is a dispositional explanation of what stress that people with an internal locus of control are more likely to resist social influence than those with an external locus of control. This is because people with an internal, do you know what I'm going to do as well? Here I'm going to put locus of control in brackets, and then I can use it thereon. So this is because people with an internal locus of control are more self-confident, take responsibility and so would be more likely to would be more likely to, what I'm trying to get across is that if I've got an internal locus of control and I think that I'm in control of my behaviour and that there's a consequence to my actions that are my fault, then I'm going to be more likely to question if an authority figure is telling me to obey them, or if the group is conforming about something that I don't agree with, because I'm going to think that I'm responsible for that. So I'm trying to get that across, and that's the explanation of why people with an internal locus of control are more likely to resist social influence compared to external locus of control, because they think that everything is just kind of like luck and fate, and that things just happen to them and they've got no personal control. And so that would mean that they're more likely to obey because it's not their fault, it's the authority figure's fault, and they're probably going to be more likely to be in kind of the agentic state and things like that, which you do not have to go into detail on, but it links to that. So let's see how I can develop this. So locus of control is just like rota, it's just because people also take responsibility, and so would be more likely to resist social influence as they may feel their fault. However, people with an external locus of control believe their behavior is influenced by fate and luck, likely to resist social influence because they feel they have no control or power to influence their situation. That there will get you 3 marks for outlining, because essentially I've said that it's a dispositional explanation, I've said it's by rota, I've talked about resistance to social influence, I've said that internal are more likely than external, and I've said why, so I've specifically explained why. Now, when you were answering these, there was as well a focus on external but not on internal, but internal are more likely to resist. So because it's asking for resistance to social influence, it would make more sense to talk about them than just talk about external. So there needs to kind of be reference to internal, and also specifically why. So that's what I've explained there. So you're not just defining what locus of control is, you're not just saying what the theory is, you're explaining how that theory can be applied to resistance to social influence, because locus of control as a dispositional theory can be applied to many things. It can be applied to why people have phobias, for example. So we're applying it to resistance to social influence. You've got to kind of make sure that you do that specifically to get the marks. Now, that's the first part of it. Now, you also need to evaluate this locus of control, because this theory might be a lot of rubbish. So you kind of need to come up with some points. What I would say is maybe give us supporting points or some evidence that this is actually the case, that it is a good explanation for resistance to social influence, and then a however and put a weakness. So let's duplicate this and do an evaluation. So we want to start off with this theory. In fact, I'll not put that, I'll put locus of control as an explanation for resistance to social influence is supported by, so I've got the point here, these are what I'm going to use, so I'll just copy and paste this over. Supported by AQA, who conducted a meta-analysis of studies of the relationship between locus of control and different forms of social conformity. What I'm going to actually do is just put AQA's meta-analysis of studies, the relationship between different forms of social influence, found Those with an external locus are always significantly more easily persuaded. And more conforming. Okay. So that there is a little technique for you where I've started off my point. So my point is a strength of this explanation is that it's got supporting research, and then I've summarised briefly, I mean it could probably be a bit more briefer than that, but briefly summarised a piece of research, what they did, so meta-analysis, and what was found. And then I can't just end it there. So some of you would just end it there, and you can't do that. You've got to explain, you know, what does that actually mean in terms of the theory. So therefore suggesting this is a valid explanation of why internal locus of control are more likely to resist social influence. So that's one point. Now, if I'm going for a weakness, and this is a contrasting point, I want to put a word like however. Now, I don't use however if I'm doing another strength because that's supporting. So you'd put additionally or furthermore. But if I want a however, I'm saying the opposite, or a word like conversely is another one that you might use. So we've got Twang et al. Oh, the wrong thing there, big thing of my face. So however, Twang et al. You can put the dates if you want, but AQA are not really that fussy, to be honest. Analysed data from American studies over a 40-year period and found people have become more resistant to obedient yet more external. This is Rotter's theory of locus of control, as if it was correct, this questions the validity of Rotter's theory of locus of control as if it was correct. Would be expected that people internal instead. I mean, it's not amazing, but it's basically what you need to get the marks. So we've got Twenge analysed data from American studies over a 40-year period and found people have become more resistant to obedience yet more external. This questions the validity of Rotter's theory of locus of control. As if it was correct, it would be expected that people would have become internal instead. As you can see there, we've got a point. In fact, maybe the point's lacking, but maybe you don't need it. But there's a summary of this. I've kind of combined the two there. So there's a point, and then there's the kind of summary of the research, and then we've got it's what that actually means, the impact. This is missed out a lot on people's answers. What does that point therefore mean about the theory? So is the theory valid? Is it not? So in this case, it can be criticised. There is also another point that you could make, which is this one, that Rotter suggested that locus of control only occurs in terms of resistance to social influence if it's in a novel situation, and it doesn't have an influence as much if it's in a familiar setting. So you could actually criticise this point, or even, you know, this meta-analysis, because maybe these studies were conducted in laboratory settings. If you think about Ash and you think about Milgram, they are in artificial settings. So you could actually say on here, although this contradicts findings, could be because these studies were conducted in artificial novel situations, and therefore novel situations, and Rotter suggests locus of control is less influential Oh, in fact, that point doesn't go with that, does it? Because he's saying that it's less influential in familiar settings. So that actually, hold on. Because these studies were conducted in artificial novel. Well, if they're in novel settings, that would support the point, wouldn't it? And what was stressed. In fact, I'll put additionally. Additionally, there may be contradictions in findings methodology of the analysed studies, as Rotter suggests locus of control is less influential and more in artificial novel. In fact, I'll just put more in novel situations. And so not controlled, it will affect the validity. Control affects social influence. Yeah, it's a bit with that point, to be honest. This is why it's like an additional at the end. Like, these two are much better, and you only need those two because you just have 2 points. If you're doing a 16 mark, you would obviously kind of talk about this one as well, but it's not as good because it would probably be better as well to put some kind of evidence in. Like, if you put, you know, for example, you might see more resistance to social influence in studies like Milgram and Ash because they are novel situations rather than in real life situations, so therefore it might lack ecological validity. Maybe I'll put that actually, ecological validity there. Yeah, so something like that. Compare it to what you did and see where you need to improve.